It is 6:30 and I'm going to call, where are you going? Call this meeting to order. Stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible. Justice.
Where did David Knudsen go?
I knew it.
Yeah. Brad, just give me a little rear end. And then we'll do roll call.
Mayor Bachran,
Here.
Trustee Knudsen, Trustee Valentine. Oh, okay. Trustee Valentine,
Here.
Trustee Stetler,
Here.
Trustee Smith,
Here.
Trustee Markle, Trustee Weber,
Here. He's here.
all right, thank you. You're all here except for Trustee Markle.
Right. All right. We have a quorum and continue. First item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second. Discussion?
Just one comment on the packet. There's a PDF portfolio in there. I can't open it. I would like to have the packets open PDFs rather than containerized. Cell phones can't open them, mini tablets can't open them. My Linux system won't open them. So that's on page 9.
The one that can't open online.
Can't open PDF portfolios. It's a private format owned by.
Okay. All right, any further discussion? All right, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, that motion passes. Next is announcements. I have a couple of announcements. First, I want to thank our citizen panel very much for stepping up to the plate and helping us with our administrator interviews. I would like to thank Kayla Rosen, Linda McCone, Elaine Brett, Christine Patterson, Lynn Howe, and Tina Walker, who volunteered but unfortunately couldn't help with the panel. I'd also like to announce that the board made a decision after interviewing the candidates today that we would offer the job to neither candidate, and we're reopening the application process again. So back to square one.
What a waste.
Here we go. Sir, I would appreciate it if you would not comment on this discussion whatsoever, since you chose not to take part in it at all. Mr. Knudsen?
I was just going to add that point that getting comments from someone who refused to participate in the process is out of order.
All right,
Still a waste.
Mr.
A lot
Weber.
of time wasted.
Mr. Weber, you are out of order. You do not have the floor. I do not grant you the floor. We are moving on. I also would like to ask the board, the town attorney and the interim town administrator would like to set a board workshop to define roles and responsibilities for the board, as well as to craft a meeting structure that might more closely result in the board's expectations of meetings in January. Now, since we will have our lovely interim town administrator for a while still, the town attorney has said that he will be in Aspen for the end of January.
Yeah, I mean, can you share what days you're gonna be in Aspen that you could come over for the special meeting?
Yes, I will. Thank you. Let me double check to make sure. So I will be there the weekend of the 28th, and I will be leaving Monday, January 30th. So I could make it to Paonia in the evening from Aspen on the 30th. Or I could potentially extend the stay and arrive on the 31st.
Okay, so we could have it sometime on the 31st. That work with your schedule? No.
No, I'm leaving for Arizona 31st.
Could you do the evening
The
of
30th is good.
What about the evening of the 30th? That would work. What about you, Mr. Weber?
Yes.
Mr. Stelter?
Checking right now.
That would work for me as well.
That will work.
Okay, so let's tentatively set it for, would 5 o'clock work for you?
That works for me, Mayor. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so we'll tentatively set it for 5 o'clock on January 30th. All right, great, wonderful, thank you. All right, any other announcements? Yes,
I just have a question. We have a couple of members of the audience here that are here for an RFP.
yeah,
I don't know if the other firm is showing up, but it seems like you're gonna have to wait a long time to get to the agenda. The number 11 on the agenda. I wonder if the board might consider moving that up.
yeah,
This is the RFP for
Right.
the master.
right. Well, would you like me,
I'd like to move that we move agenda item 11 to happen right after the consent agenda.
oh. Okay. You got a second on that?
Second.
Discussion?
Most important things on here will be the budget. Sorry, we have to get those, this crowded agenda, we have to get those done.
Right. But it's only one item. Any other further discussion? Okay, anything from the public? All right, we have a motion and a second to move the RFP discussion up to directly after the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
All right, that motion passes. All right. Any further announcements? All right, next on the agenda is recognition of community and guests. Is there anyone who would like to address the board on an item that is not on the agenda? Yes, Ms. Watson.
Suzanne Watson. I wasn't going to say anything about this, but in light of the thanks that you just gave to this panel, and then the high-handed way you just treated one of your board members for not following the rules or not engaging in the process, I'm going to have to make this statement. And I'd like the town attorney to listen carefully. Title 24, the open meeting statute, does not allow you to make decisions in an executive session. Therefore, your consideration of letters of interest and the appointment of a community panel during the executive session was illegal. Letters of interest were not published for public review, nor was the review of the panel applicants handled publicly. The process selecting this panel occurred entirely in a closed meeting. There was insufficient detail on the executive session agenda to notify the public as to your actions. That's a violation of open meeting, the noticing laws. I would have protested either before or after if I had noticed your plan. I have not seen the names of the panel members presented to the public, and yesterday the panel met in an unnoticed meeting. The public was absolutely denied their right to observe this process. There have been so many breaches in meeting notices in the past, and it's been easy to point your finger at Corinne, and I point my finger at her too. But now it's your turn to step up to the plate and make sure you're being the most transparent possible, especially when it comes to hiring an administrator. This is very important for the town. And you cannot use the excuse of the executive session lets you do all this hiring stuff in secret, because that panel was not absolutely necessary for the process.
So I hope you can hold to a higher standard after this. I think you're all culpable. And I think there's a lot of irony that your ethical standards are so diminished. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Watson. Anyone else? All right, seeing none, next on the agenda is the consent agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second,
Discussion. Yes, Mr. Brown.
the disbursements have not been reviewed and I cannot certify as to whether they're correct or not. Neither can Dave.
Okay,
There was a staff meeting at the time, 10 o'clock today when we were scheduled to do.
okay. Questions on the consent agenda? Yes, Mr. Pinkman.
Well, in lieu of that, I mean, typically in the finance committee where we did it before we looked at each individual item, I asked for invoices to be available. Would it be possible to do that?
No, I'm not sure what would be the protocol.
Yeah, so our questions on the items, we have them right there. So questions on the items on the consent agenda. Okay, seeing none. Any other questions on anything on the consent agenda? All right, questions from the public on anything on the consent agenda? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second to accept the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. All right, that motion passes. Next is the RFP. So Orion Rising has submitted what?
There's a different firm called Microcom.
Or-
Called that Orion Rising, that's me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it Phoenix? It's Phoenix Rising. All these birds rising. So I received an email from Ty Johnson from Craft Consulting. Let's see. Yeah, from CART, I'm sorry. From CART this afternoon, and it reads, "Hi, Mary, due to some contracts that we recently executed, CART no longer has the capacity to take on this project. Please withdraw our proposal for consideration. Thank you and the town of Paonia for your consideration, and we wish you the best of luck with the master plan effort. Thank you." So we have one proposal for the master plan. It is in our packets.
We also have some additional materials. Would I give them to you or should I hand them out to people?
I think handing them out to people would be the best thing.
One copy. Cross reference.
For what page are we on in the packet? My paper only starts.
Yes, then we'll start.
Anybody know what page we're going to?
99. I think it's further down.
I think so.
194, thank you.
Yes.
Oh,
These are revisions we made to our proposal after we met with the planning commission in November, and per their recommendations that we remove a couple things from the original proposal, consolidate individual interviews into group interviews. We also removed some technical focus groups. That was going to be a bigger chunk of work. And we also removed some time that would have been spent on housing, understanding that there's going to be work done around the housing needs assessment. And we also are proposing kind of a phased approach.
Yeah, do you guys have any questions about the budget revisions?
Well, we kind of. Let's walk us through.
Okay, so so we had originally proposed, was it 67,000. We met with the planning commission. And then upon their direction, and the Mayor Buckran and Trustee Knudsen are part of that. We took out some of the items to bring the budget down. So what you're seeing before you in the Excel sheet, I just want to point out this sheet has the full budget. And you will see that that revised budget that took out all the things Melissa just mentioned is 54,000. So that's we have, brought down the total cost of the project by taking out those items that were in the original budget proposal. Then the second budget, which I'll draw your attention to, is on this one. So we wanted to just kind of lay out for you a phased approach to this project, knowing that there's some really important things happening in the next couple of months. Hopefully a new town administrator, you're going to have a housing needs assessment conducted. And we want to make sure that we are both responsive to and can incorporate those aspects, as well as help really engage the public in a positive manner. So we are proposing that the first phase of the project be focused on the background research and analysis that was part of the RFP, which was a request to succinctly summarize existing documentation that the town has already put together on various aspects that would feed into a master plan. So this budget that you see right here, the 17,000, is just for that piece of it. There are quite a few pages in terms of how much we have to read.
plus.
Yeah. And so we're just proposing that we do this background research and analysis synthesis first. And so you understand how the cost of that breaks down, and that at which point in time we can reassess where the other pieces are and how to engage. We believe, based on if things move forward sort of as planned, but also understanding that things take time, that the second aspect of our work will have to do with coordinating with the housing needs assessment and understanding what their findings are and working with them. And the third phase, we envision being the community stakeholder engagement process, where we would help communicate both the existing synthesis of the work that's been done to date, as well as the housing needs assessment in a targeted fashion, helping both visioning for the different parts of the master plan and getting public, just increasing public knowledge around all the work that's already been done. So we would see that as phase 3, and then obviously accumulating in the final production of the master plan document at that point in time, hoping that the housing needs assessment is complete and a new administrator is on board, and then therefore able to incorporate any directionality or learnings that come from those aspects. Does that make sense?
So the phased approach, we wanted to make it easy for you to say yes, knowing that there's a lot of dynamics happening right now. And we could still go forward with the whole scope. But knowing that I think you're still waiting to hear about the DOLA grant for the planning.
Correct. Just for the board.
And we'd love to get started working on this, and we think there's value in getting started sooner than later. So that's why we also have this one chunk that we could start with, if that works better for you.
Yeah, if you were concerned about approving the whole amount for any reason, although we understand there is a budget line item for it, should you be reticent about that, this proposal would just, the 17,615 would cover the background and synthesis and allow us to get started to produce something that we assume you're going to need, would be beneficial regardless of how you move forward and how much total money you choose to spend on the master planning process.
Okay, questions from the board? Yeah.
I just want to mention the portion of that until the grant's awarded and you have accepted funds.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we're understanding you have existing funds in the budget, which we would then propose.
Spend any funds on the project or the grant to spend.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had understood that there were already different funds set aside for the project.
But they consider that starting the project for the grant, so it's not like you can do some of the project with your own money and then some of the project with the grant. So,
Yes.
Could you describe more timeline, and we are talking about the grant that we're hoping to get, that we have the matching funds for, the 25,000 and the 25,000. And what is the status of that grant? Are they just waiting to hear from us?
You should hear relatively soon. Those planning grants, they turn around pretty fast. I think one of the hangups has been that they just went through the tier 2 awards. So my guess is that it will be soon.
I think by the end of the year, Leslie?
Yeah, I do think that.
Okay. Okay, well, then that would kind of fall in line with your first quarter of 2023.
Yeah, we were unsure of the process that you all needed to go through, but in efforts to try to give you different options, these are what we have come up with.
And I agree, the RFP was written with a timeline, which of course you cannot longer meet because.
That's a second issue, and I hope whenever it is that the funding is approved, should you choose to go with Phoenix Rising Resources and this team, that we actually look at the timeline at that point in time and agree on what the deliverable would be.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Yes, Dave.
Well, is it inappropriate to approve the RFP?
You can approve the RFP, you just can't sign a contract with them.
Right.
The project starts at the point that you sign a contract.
The approval should be contingent on receiving the grant.
I like that. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the RFP submitted by Phoenix Rising Resources for the master planning grant, pending the approval of our grant.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Further discussion from the board?
Do we need, can we take this as part of the RFP? Do we need any sort of a separate motion for the latest information they brought us? It
It's
can go
included.
under the same umbrella.
On,
Okay.
Let me add to the motion in the amount of $54,800.
Second.
I'll second that.
okay. Anything from the public? All right, seeing none, we have a motion to accept the RFP from. Right, Phoenix Rising Resources. For our RFP for the master plan in the amount of $54,895 contingent on the acceptance of the approval, thank you, the approval of the grant. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, that motion passes. All right, congratulations, thank you very much. We look forward, well, hopefully we'll get approval of the grant soon and then we can move forward. Thank you very much. All right, next on the item on the agenda is the staff reports. So interim administrator's report, we have a multi-committee report.
I know, I'm doing my first official report. So, in writing. So I'll just go down, what's in here. We have the draft master engineering contracts. I think we reached agreement, and JDS Hydro on the water and sewer master agreement. And tell me what page you're on in the packet.
No, it's not. Or is it in our table?
On paper, it's an antique method.
Oh, sorry, I did not see it.
I'm
Thank you.
triaging my work, and this did not
Sorry.
So, and then the SGM contract, we have a memo or in
Do we have
the,
extra copies for public?
there, yes, Sam has extra copies. Sam has extra copies. You have to give up yours. So, the SGM contract, we have, one section that Nick wants to seek your direction on, and then we'll finish that up and bring it to you at your first January. The land use issues, I've compiled them all in one place. So we have the Hive building that, we have a permit application. We have had several sets of plans submitted. We're still seeking clarity about which plan they intend to go forward with, because at least two of the plans show a change of use that would require additional parking. They don't have parking on the site, and I have advised them of their option of getting a lot to provide the parking. So I don't know that that's advanced that much. Dan's in the process of trying to figure out that they also just submitted a facade plan without any floor plans, and we're not sure if they're just going to do the facade now or the interior, and that will play out over time. It's in flux. I've been asked to revisit a number of land use decisions. And so I just want to go over the conclusion. And as you know, one of the issues is that multiple people like to revisit multiple land use issues that have already been revisited. So I'm calling these the final answer. And they probably won't be, but so the Kennedy building, I reviewed that and you know, I don't know if the audience knows, but I have extensive planning law training. I was a planning director in California where the joke is planners have to be lawyers, even though we're not. And so I do understand interpreting codes and how these things have to work. There was no change of use in my investigation that I uncovered with the Kennedy building. The apartments were abandoned. That does not mean the use was abandoned. The use still stands. So at the time that they now have I think they've already renovated those. So they changed the number of apartments from 6 to 5, which would actually be less of a parking requirement. And that in any case, according to the code, their parking situation is grandfathered. They would have to meet new parking requirements for the Kennedy building only if there was a change of use. The Masonic building, there was a change of use for sure, from the assembly room at the top to apartments. And for zoning purposes, the use is usually what was originally intended for the space. I have heard anecdotally that they stored things in that assembly space, but I don't think that constitutes a change of use to storage. I think it's still considered assembly. And then they pulled a building permit to construct apartments in that area. Assembly spaces usually take more parking than apartments, so I don't think that there's a parking requirement triggered. So I do agree with Corinne's original interpretation on that one. There was also a question about whether both the Kennedy and the Masonic building should have paid for more taps. The idea that each unit would have to have a tap. I read the code fairly thoroughly, and I do not see that a building needs more than one tap in any part of the code. I do see that units have to be individually metered. So that requirement would be applied to the Masonic building apartments. And then the other case, of course, is the balcony. And you know, the problem with the balcony is that there was an approval issued, a paper trail for an approval. Whether that approval was consistent with the code or not, you know, to me, a balcony is more of an encroachment than a zoning issue, but it was approved. And the attorney, I think, has advised you previously that there's nothing that town can do about that at this point, because money's been spent. And that they did pull an excavation permit last Wednesday, and I understand that's under construction. I just got an email from Dan, and he said that the actual construction plans for the balcony have not been approved, and he has requested a building permit from the owner for the balcony itself, the construction of the balcony. We had a report of a zoning violation at 115 Doors Avenue. I investigated it. It was indeed a zoning violation, and I notified the owner that he would have to cease and desist his business, and it would be sending a 30-day cease and desist notice, and he was cooperative. They're on the 7-foot sergeant fence. Just what I reviewed so far, and Sam is still getting me some more documents to look at. It appears, at least from what I understand, that the fence itself was approved at 7 feet, even though the code doesn't allow a 7-foot fence. I think, probably the town's only recourse at this point, because there's a paper trail on that one, is if you really want to reduce the fence height to 6 feet, the town would have to try and negotiate with the property owner and pay for the reduction. I don't think it's worth it. I've also heard from people that those kinds of things set a precedence. I don't agree with that. I don't think a precedent is set by one mistake. If you are repeatedly over a period of time interpreting your code inaccurately, that might cause a precedent argument. I just don't see it with just, and I haven't heard of that mistake being repeated. There's in my mind, a separate issue, although a lot of people are relating them, that there was a property line encroachment created by the fence. Corey and I are going to look at the town portion of that tomorrow. And if it is encroaching on town property, I'll issue a letter that they have to move the fence back on property. But as far as the dispute between the private property owners, which I heard from one of the town should not get involved in that. That's really a private issue that they're going to have to work out with their surveyor without town involvement. But we will check to see if there's an encroachment on the town property, and then if there is, issue a letter that they have to do it. And I usually do for something like the fence in the winter. I'm going to get a longer amount of time. It's hard to move the fence in the winter. I tend to look at seasonal restrictions and give them a reasonable amount of time. We received a de-annexation application. I don't know if you're aware of it, for 14 plus acres of property on Highway 133. It's property that was subdivided from is it the River Bend subdivision?
It's Hotspur.
When I looked at that de-annexation application, the reasons did not make sense to me. And I started to look at the code, and I don't think there was any reason to give the information to the owners that they couldn't do certain things. The code does not say that. And I did review that with Nick, and we don't believe that anything they were told was the reason they had to de-annex was actually a reason that they had to de-annex. So they have pulled their de-annexation petition that will remain in the town. And they requested another meeting to talk about what they want to do there. Everything that they proposed so far that I can see is allowed by the code. And I don't know why that information was conveyed, but at this point, the good news is that you always want to keep property in the town and not have it go back to the county. So their intention, they were actually very happy, even though they spent money, on that particular information. And we did refund their application for the next one is, I've had a couple of inquiries, and I think later on the agenda we are going to talk about the moratorium, and Nick is going to present his interpretation to you. That there must be a couple of properties for sale. It seems like there's more than one property I'm hearing about that people want to know if they can build additional units on an R3 zone. And my answer to that, as an experienced community development planning director, is I don't know. So the big question is, do I have to get more taps, and can I build a new unit with the one water tap? The way I read the code, they can build an additional unit, but they have to meter it individually. That's what the code says. And we'll talk about that later when during this issue. And then I've always said, I can't tell you anything else because I don't see your plan. And I can't tell you, Dan's going to have to decide that the structure can bear another unit. And we have to see a plan to know if the setbacks are okay and all that other stuff. So I've become very adept at saying, I don't know. You have to submit more information. And people may complain to you about that because everybody wants me to tell them, yes, you can do exactly what you want and you're approved. but I don't do that, so just so you know. We had a building permit that was issued for improvements to 221 Arnaga. Arnaga. And they have exhausted their permit extensions. They wanted another one, but the building code does not prescribe another one. So we have asked them to apply for a new building permit. And then the Learning Council at 138 Grand Avenue plans to change of use, and they inquired about how to meet parking requirements, and I referred them to the code sections. And then lastly, as you probably all know, we've received 2 inquiries from 2 different developers regarding the possible purchase and development of the school property. Both developers sought assurances that their ideas would be approved, and we assured them that we could not give them those assurances. So I think one developer, did they present at the planning commission? And so what they were told, and here's the distinction, they have not purchased the property yet. If they had purchased the property, we probably would not have told them they could do this. They could present their ideas to the planning commission. They could ask for information about zoning and, and approval permits and all that kind of stuff. But the town could not in any way say, we like it, we're going to approve it, or we don't like it, we're not going to approve it. That's not what we can do at this stage. And of course, developers always want assurances because they're going to spend a lot of money purchasing a property and putting it in escrow for a long time until they can get approvals, but we just can't give it to them. And I think out of that, because there was so much pressure on you and other officials, that the town attorney issued a kind of an ex parte communications refresher memo for you. And we'll continue to hold the line. One of the developers really wanted some update documents to show that the work had been done toward the lifting of the moratorium. I sent him what had already been sent to you in packets. Jeremiah remembered those meetings, and I just sent him what was already in packets. Water and sewer improvements we've been working on, that's spending a lot of time on that. And we're meeting tomorrow to kind of go over the 3-year most important projects that have to be done and start talking about a funding strategy. And I just want to let you know, this is kind of a staff planning effort to put together a recommendation to you before we did anything with it. We would come to. And Dave Knudsen sent me this email that said he heard about something. Was it Houston?
Pardon me?
With the power failure in Houston?
I think it was Houston where they had a power failure. They lost their water service to the entire Houston area. They had a boil water regulation that went on because their water wasn't safe. Because their water treatment plant lost power, they could not treat the water properly, and they had to go into the boil water thing. And it reminded me of being sitting on this board a couple years ago and approving the purchase of, I believe, a $10,000 generator that was supposed to be set up by the water treatment plant as a backup. The questions we were asking at the time is, how often is it going to be run? Do we know it's going to be run? Is it sufficient capacity? All those things. We did. My recollection, purchase it.
We did purchase it, but it's never been hooked up.
It is there. It's just not been put online. I have been talking to one of the cat reps to see what that might take to be able to utilize that.
So, and in addition, we probably need other generators. So the public works staff is working on figuring out where we need generators, what size they need to be. And the State Department of Homeland Security does process FEMA, which we call HMGP grants for just generators. I've applied for numerous ones for different entities, and we'll put in an application for that, but we'll send that recommendation to you before we do anything with funding. That's a pretty easy fix with funding.
It just worried.
But good point, because the state wants you to have generators in those systems. They are not, it's not like, please give us generators. It's like, please apply for this money because you need generators. So we're working on that one. On the CDOT grant, I just, I think I already mentioned this to you earlier. I contacted, the CDOT told me that they're not gonna have a contract for us to even look at till February, and it probably won't get executed till March. They are so backed up on projects. And they also cautioned to me that this will be a very slow rollout project because they have to approve everything. Your RFP, your request for bids, your process, they're going to be involved in every single step. And so just so you know that, because I think there might have been an expectation that in 2 years you're going to have a bright and shiny new intersection. I don't think that's going to happen. These federal highway funds are just onerous to manage. So, and they're going to be managing it for you. That's the good news since you're a small town. But it's slow. The other thing is, I think, Nick, we're working on a quitclaim deed for the school. They're, working with Nick to quitclaim that land. And then there will be IGAs drawn up at some point with the school district in Delta County to solidify the agreements that have already been made. And I wanted to let you know that I'm getting citizen requests for town attorney opinions. Please ask the town attorney to issue this opinion on this particular issue. And what I've said is that we don't send citizen requests to town. And I'm telling this because you're going to get complaints that I'm not very nice. Town attorney opinions that if they really feel this is important, they can request it from the board, but generally speaking, the town attorney only works directly on town business. And I've also had inquiries from people who want to meet with me to debate and revisit previous decisions. And I have not consented to those meetings. First of all, I don't have time, and I don't think people realize that you're paying me by the hour. And I don't see any purpose in rehashing and debating things that have been already rehashed and debated. So there may be some complaints about that. And then lastly, I just want to thank the staff for their participation in the candidate interviews. I think we did a very exhaustive tour, and the candidates came to you with a lot of good information about what's going on in the town and capital improvements. And then the staff, a group of staff people interviewed the candidates, and I thought had some very thoughtful recommendations.
Okay, any questions for the town administrator? Yeah. You first.
Okay, thanks. We had a bit of a conundrum at the last PNC meeting because JDS Hydro was asking us to make a prediction about how many taps were going to be in this. We kind of took umbrage with that during the meeting because they're supposed to tell us whether we have enough water to serve the existing taps. And then here they're trying to tell us how many taps do you anticipate going out if the moratorium is listed. So we felt like we were between a rock and a hard place because it was just throwing mud against the wall to guess how many taps we were going to submit. So
Jeremiah and I are working on it.
okay, so we'll just stay up.
Yeah, I don't know. We're going to be able to have a crystal ball, but we're getting information. Jeremiah sent me a bunch of stuff, and we'll get something together.
And then the second thing is we have just finished a lot of investment in time of citizen staff and board about the hiring process. And I think it's a good time. It's so fresh that we should be looking at how would we improve it next time, because we're going to go through it again. But we just finished it. So what would we do differently? It's important. A kind of a debrief at some point.
Sure. I actually think you had a very good process. I don't think you did anything incorrectly. I mean, it's a pretty typical process that other towns who are serious about making sure they get the right fit do. So I don't see any negatives in what you did, but you may.
glitches, but aside from little glitches.
You know, I think we had a comment earlier about transparency. I understand that, and we can do better there. But just if there was anything else that was going on, if anyone has comments, maybe the personnel committee could get them.
Personnel committee. Not like to pass it on.
Just kidding.
But not for Christmas.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
After Christmas.
Yeah, after Christmas, we'll take whatever you have.
Okay.
I have a question on number 3 and number 5. And on number 3, I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but if there were no apartments in the Masonic building, that is a change of use that would require a special review based on our code, because there were no living units up there. It's old news, but that's.
It requires special review as in.
It should have had a special review, which would have talked about parking and everything else. And it's because it was a use that was not there. And in a C1, if you were putting in multifamily dwellings, it is by special review, not by,
Okay, I'll look into that, because the building permit is still in play.
and
I don't know that it's been issued. I know that. But I can talk to Dan and see what that situation is.
And I may have sent you where in the code in that table. I should send you to the multifamily dwelling. What has been the issue here is there is a place in the code, and you may know it better than I do, about business as a secondary use, business as a primary use, whereas a person wants to put an apartment in the building they're gonna be having their business in. That did not require special review. But if you are building dwelling units and making money off of them, that requires a special review.
Okay, I'll look at.
So good. Thank you for that. And one last question. Oh, and Nick, have something on that?
No,
Oh, okay. All right. And I have one last point, and that is on number 5 with the balcony. I believe on November 8th, we passed a motion unanimously to ask Nick. He actually had thought this would be something we should do. That was where we were asked him to put together an agreement with the owners of the Masonic building on how they are going about the balcony. Because of the fact that they are putting private property over public right of way, there needs to be some sort of agreement should we have to make them move that, because we're doing something on our public property. Nick could elaborate on that. It was actually something he had recommended, but it was a unanimous motion to get an agreement from our attorney with the owners of the Masonic building regarding the balcony.
Correct.
Indemnification.
Yeah,
Just a minute.
I made that motion.
No, I made that motion.
Yeah, I worked on it.
All right,
So
but,
there's 2 of them.
okay, whatever. All right,
Yeah.
Mr. Markle.
Well, could I just ask, is Nick still working on that? We have fallen silent. So Nick, I didn't know if you're still working on that, on the balcony issue. Thank you.
Trustee Smith, I did reach out to the property owners, and they did respond back and said that they would be in touch after Thanksgiving. We haven't gotten in touch again, but there is an expectation that's been set now. The board, if I remember the motion correctly, it did say attempt to negotiate this encroachment license. And of course, this is something that will need to be negotiated with the property owners because this approval has already occurred as we've discussed before in the open meeting. So that is underway. Trying to get that negotiated. One comment I will make is the excavation permit was issued, and when you look at the code provisions regarding excavation permits, there are protections for the town that are very similar to those of the encroachment license agreement that I was suggesting that apply to the construction and excavation itself. So there are protections that are built into that permit if it was issued in accordance with the code, and that will protect the town during the construction. It's the encroachment license agreement will apply to post-construction concerns that the town might have, should we be able to negotiate that agreement and get it signed.
Mr. Markle.
Thanks, Mayor. And thank you, Leslie, for all your work that you've done so far. I apologize. I've been sick for the past week, so I've kind of been in and out on contact by email. But I wanted to follow up on a couple of things that you went through on your update. I guess we're going to address the moratorium later on in the meeting. One thing was a generator that you mentioned, or generators, I suppose, that Dave brought up. We do have one that we paid, I think, $10,000 for, or it might have been 20 down at the sewer plant. That I think should be included in whatever communication or process we have moving forward. Since we have that equipment, I'd like to make sure that it's included in the process. Regarding the number of taps that we have, or might have, I guess, based on the JDS inquiry, my understanding was that their question was the location of where new taps might be, and my expectation is that so that they can size plants or lines appropriately for whatever zones might have a higher load forthcoming. And then finally, I wanted to make sure, and this might not be the right time, depending on what happened, but we have had our conversation about Corinne Ferguson's final payout with 240 hours of prior sick leave that was paid at her current, or I guess final rate, rather than her rate in 2018. And we can discuss that during the Finance Committee if it's appropriate, or Personnel Committee if it's appropriate, or now if it's appropriate. I'm not sure what would be best.
Okay. I'm not sure when it, probably Finance Committee, we'll get down there. Okay.
Will we make it to Finance Committee tonight, or are we going to make sure that we get to the end of the meeting?
Well, I
today?
hope so. We're going to try and truck on through.
Okay.
All right, could make that a placeholder for the next meeting if it doesn't happen at this meeting.
Okay. Any other questions for the town administrator? All right, if not, let's move on to finance treasurer's report.
I've seen the written report. Entertain any questions?
Questions? Or Cindy? Okay, seeing none, we have police report.
Yeah, so a couple of highlights. Majority of our officers completed some active shooter training over at the VOTEC campus that's over here. That was put on by several surrounding agencies. All the surrounding agencies work together, they all attended. That way we get to work with those agencies. Probably all be responding. That training went really well. I also went up and participated in the WK Schools Alice Trail, so we kind of get an understanding of how that works with them, what they do, their policies and procedures. At the same time, while that was happening, explain to them what our procedures would be, so they kind of have an understanding and idea of what's going on outside of their building, outside of their room. We'll handle that. The staff and the students up there did a tremendous job. They're very well trained. They take it serious and did a good job. And the last highlight I'll hit on is we went down to Northport High School, and he assisted them with a program where they do mock interviews with students to help them prepare for admissions interviews, employment interviews, just some of those things moving forward. That was very successful, and it was nice to be a part of that at Norfolk High School. I know there's still raw feelings over County High School, but it was nice to be integrated into that again, start working with them. That would be good. The other thing, two things I've got on here. One is, been working on this kind of an idea. Got a hold of Kim Shea, who's the Academy Director for Police Academy down at Technical College of Rockies. And we discussed a plan where we would give them, if approved, one of our old police vehicles that no longer functions for us. And in exchange, they would keep repairs on that, set that up for their students. And we would get a sponsored spot, tuition free in their academy for a cadet that we sponsor. This serves a couple of purposes. One, it saves us money, so we're not paying for that tuition spot. It also kind of flows in line with my philosophy of equipment in, equipment out. We don't need to bring new equipment in, keep everything that we already have. It just tends to build up. We have to keep track of it. We have to document it. The other thing is it helps them out because Post is encouraging all the academies to get their cadets a training in SUVs and vehicles that are more top heavy, because that's what most of the departments are operating in now. Because most of the academies are still using Crown Victoria's, Chargers, and Impalas. So they are encouraging them to teach those cadets how to drive some of the bigger vehicles. So they are excited about that. The discussion about that really revolved around the process of transferring a vehicle the town owns to them with board approval. And how that works. They have a contract they've used before in similar situations, but that's kind of what this is on the agenda for tonight, is a discussion about that. You want me to go to the second one now as well? So the second part is a contract acquisition for a candidate who has applied with the department. They're currently 6-year Army veteran. They have a year with the Delta County SOGA on their current patrol officer with another department. But they have a contract with that department. They have applied with us. They would like us to acquire that contract in exchange for signing a new contract of 3 years with our department. But if they have, they would owe that money back 2 years. This also serves a couple of purposes in that it saves us money of trying to send or sponsor another cadet through the academy, pay the tuition. It also helps that we're getting a lateral veteran officers that immediately go through a shortened FTO process with reduced training hours and time. They can step into a leadership role, a corporal position in our department. It kind of tends to work a little bit better for everybody that way. We've had other candidates apply. Our residency requirement is making it very difficult for a lot of people. It's not that they don't want to move up here, it's that a lot of them own a home. And this process of listing their home, selling their home, moving their kids, buying a new home, it just tends to bog down as we get into the process. A lot of them are interested, but they can't move on with that process. This candidate is not in that situation. He's currently renting. He wants to move up here. He has that flexibility where he can do some of those things for us. But those are kind of the two things that I brought for discussion tonight.
So do you need approval tonight, or do you want just discussion tonight?
My preference would be approval, and the reason is this academy starts January 4th. So in order for us to get him through his fingerprinting, his background checks, all of his interview process, and get all his paperwork filled out with the academy, which their enrollment is currently closed, but they would be willing to open it for us to get somebody in. We're operating in a very tight window.
Okay, well, would somebody like to make a motion?
I actually wanted to ask questions first. How much does that typically cost to send a candidate through the academy?
So the academy right now, their current tuition, I believe, is running right about $500 roughly. That's tuition, booking fees, uniforms are another $1,400. That's what we would be paying if we were to send a cadet through. That's what the cadets pay when they send themselves through. We actually have two cadets, two individuals in our cadets who are interested in this position. The issue that both of them face is that while they're very much interested in the career, they're not in a position where they can stop work for 4 months with their families to attend the academy and cover that tuition, those books, those fees. That's an issue, not just for us or for them. That's departments all across the state are facing similar issues. It's gotten expensive to do anything. Training police officers is no different.
So does the come to get a handle on what the vehicle is worth and what the, in other words, like, is the $1,400 and the $500, is it like $2,000 total?
So go ahead.
I can tell you that we purchased that I think it's a 2011 Explorer from Delta County 4 years ago for $3,600.
We're getting a smoking deal.
That's one of the things I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
Also, how much is the buyout of that contract and do we phase it out year by year? Because my experience with human beings is past behavior is an indicator of future behavior. If he's buying out the contract now, what's we're going to buy out the contract we give him. And so I want to see that forgiveness is staged, not.
Yeah, so the way this is often structured is on a year by year basis. So each year of employment would reduce it by a percentage that you would have to pay back. So for example, a pretty common one would be 4-year contract. After your first year, 25% reduction. That's my advice would be. That's very similar structure to what this individual has with his current employment. This would run through probably town attorney would have him review anything we set up like that, obviously. But from what I've gathered, speaking with other executives and other departments across the state, a pretty standard situation right now would be for your lateral transfers, which would be a veteran officer moving into your department, would be 3 years. And for a cadet would be 4. The reason we add that year for a cadet is because their first year is going to be a lot of training. We're going to have a lot of man hours and resources into that cadet, into that new trainee that very first year. So you tend to add that first year on top of that 3-year contract.
And how much are we paying to buy out that contract?
The balance on that is going to be approximately $7,108.65.
Yeah, I am really confused. Do we have 2 people in play here? You have the, so.
Yes.
So the persons whose contract we're buying out does not need to go to academy training. But you have another candidate to fill your second opening.
Yeah.
That needs to go to academy training, and you might be able to trade a vehicle for his training.
Yes, and actually,
Thank you.
to be perfectly clear, so yeah, we have the one who's a veteran officer with a contract. He wants to come with us, that would be the contract acquisition. That's separate. The other situation is where we would trade the vehicle to cover tuition with the academy. We actually have 2 applicants who are interested in that spot. Timeframe is just very condensed. And that's why those are.
Go ahead. Can we break this up into 2 different?
yes.
portions? Yeah, that's preferably. Okay. I will make a motion that we approve the purchase of the veteran officer's contract. It's 7,100, and maybe I shouldn't put the money in there. No, I'd like to make a motion that we buy out the veteran officer's contract so he can become employed in Paonia.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Further discussion from the board? All right, for the public? Yeah. Thomas.
Yeah, Matt, I didn't hear much about this person. What's your take on the guy?
My take on the guy has been in for several interviews, very good candidates. Like I said, his background, is 6 years Army, 1 year in the jail, he's currently a patrol officer. We would like to transition him into our open corporate spot, where he'll have some supervisory roles. Good candidate, in my brief experience here, it's unusual for us to get an applicant who is currently employed with the department, who has experience and who wants to work for us. That's part of it. The other part of it is he's a genuine, he is a good candidate. He does have that structure, does have that discipline already, as you can see. I think those things are really good for this. Like I said, I still very much would like to put in place our contract structure with them to protect the town.
Thank you.
You want to say again, Thomas? Oh, okay.
I said, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anything from the public? All right, hearing nothing, we have a motion and a second to buy out the veteran officer's contract with Bayonne. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, that motion passes. So can we get a second one on the disposal of town vehicle in exchange for a position at police academy.
I'll make that motion.
All right.
Thank you. We approve the swap the vehicle for the person to go through the account.
Okay, got a second
Second.
discussion from the board.
John Valentin.
All right, see Thomas?
Yeah, what was the vehicle?
The vehicle was a 2011 Ford Explorer. It currently has approximately 46,000 miles on it. On that NADA book value on the retail was going to be 9,900. Part of the way this would benefit us is that vehicle is in need of repairs. Needs a front end overhaul. The emergency lights are not working on it. And one of the perks to TCR is that they have our license. So this vehicle can go to their shop, their students can work on it, work on the wiring. We're not sure about the wiring. It seems to be a direct ground wire, but as far as troubleshooting that. So,
All right, thank you.
All right, public, saw a couple of hands. No, okay.
So does it have to get towed to Delta?
We're gonna try and get this vehicle to Delta. We will see it. It is in desperate need of new tires, but obviously, as I started this process a while ago, we have not put new tires on it yet. Tim Tay is watching. It is.
We have a motion and a second for a swap of the vehicle in exchange for a position at the police academy. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that motion passed. All right, next up is Public Works report. All right, you're up. Thank you, Matt.
I did submit, that report, and I also submitted.
Okay. Let's start with questions for Corey on his report. Yeah.
Can I ask a tool question?
Sure.
I just was curious about the walk behind cement cutter. Do you have one now?
We do, it's down. I'm not sure if the motor on it is seized or I need to take it somewhere for hauling there.
Mostly, I was just wondering how you've been, I know you had to cut earlier, so I just wonder if it was kind of defunct and you just would like to replace it with something that works.
So we've been to cut stuff like that. We've been just using the pan demo saws. It's way harder to make a straight cut with. And have even had contractors come in and cut stuff for us as well if it's needed to be straighter than what we could do with it.
Cindy?
We have band-aided that together for years now. It probably.
It sounds like it could be on the disposal list. Could it?
Yes, it will, it could potentially move. If it's not fixable again, then it would probably be best to put it on.
Well, why don't we get a motion to approve the tools purchase, and then if we want to talk about that.
Make a motion, we approve the tool purchase for the Public Works Department.
All right, we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, discussion from the board. Okay.
I was just gonna add, just for the record, too, that we took a tour with Corey a few weeks ago, which was so beneficial. And we got to see those big tool cabinets that were just completely cannibalized. So many of the tools were not there. So this will be wonderful. And so Corey, I hope you can get people to put stuff back.
That's another thing too. Some of the tools that also help with the organization. You know, you could just open a drawer, look immediately, see what's missing.
Corey and I talked we work with the county, the police department, and we're using a system called Asset Tiger, where we barcode over our calls equipment and it gets logged, with a spreadsheet. Was a county. And our service tickets are on cancer, what's training and cheaper. So we can.
Mark,
Thanks. Actually, Matt, that was one of my questions was, how are we going to tag and manage these assets? So I trust that we're going to utilize that system. Yes.
Yeah, that's the current plan, yes.
Okay, cool. And then I saw on page 188 of the packet for the concrete saws, there are two on that page. I assume we're looking at the $1,700 one and not the $19,000 one. Is that correct? Yes.
Let me get to
He's
that
checking.
page, sorry, my computer's. Yeah, so that bid is also a couple months old, but it is for the $1,800 one.
Right, for the Husky. Okay, cool. Thank you. That's it.
okay, anything else from the board? Okay, anything from the public? All right, seeing none, we have a motion and a second for approval of tools purchase for the Public Works Town Shop. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Right, that motion passes. All right, next up is the public hearing on the opt-out of family plan. Trying to get public hearing sign. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Corey. Yeah, thank you, guys.
Before we go,
Yeah, what?
can you please, on that last motion,
Yeah.
do an, up to amount?
Oh,
Because there's potentially shipping and such included in this that we're not aware of at this time. So if you could do up to. $1,800 or 18,000 to make sure that we have enough for shipping, etc.
okay, would somebody like to,
I'll amend the motion, bring it up to 18,000 for contingencies, but with the request that we try to keep it as low as possible.
right. Make the second on that motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor? Just. Favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Passes. All right, hearing protocol. All right, we're gonna open the hearing. This is we. Lost my secretary. Too many pieces of paper. Yeah. Resolution 2213 declaring the decision of the opt-out of the family. We have had this a couple times on the agenda now, and I would like to see that staff was polled on this and the results of that poll from staff. What were the results of that poll? Okay. The majority were not. Any questions for the staff from the board? Yes.
I have a question on the second whereas, which says that town of Paonia allows its employees to accrue sick leave and to carry unused sick leave over from 1 year to the next to a maximum of 18 weeks of paid leave, which is 720 hours. The only reason I'm asking is I've not done an exhaustive look at the personnel handbook, but I'm not familiar with that being able to carry it over that much.
That is not currently in policy.
It's PTO, right?
So this is incorrect.
Oh, so this is not true.
Good catch.
Should be
Is that
PTO.
Correct. What's the?
There is no carry, this time there is no carry over except for the few people that have prior sick leave. Which there's only
Is there maximum accrual?
four. There's just 80 hours per year you get. Well, it's so our policy and our practices aren't currently matching up because her policy was set, the discussion was had to change it. It never got changed. So I'm gonna have to go back and look at. But it was a certain amount, use or lose.
I mean,
For
if I had the
PTO.
personnel manual run out to you. That.
Are we on a time crunch for
Yes,
this?
you're at it.
Or is this-
Dave has the personnel handbook.
So we probably need to change that third whereas.
And then town clerk needs to be.
What, the bottom? Well, that's easy.
It's the second whereas.
You can just strike it. It's not important. The rest of it's still.
That's true. We could just,
The rest of it has enough content.
Currently, that policy doesn't include, it doesn't have the sick leave broken out. It is just PTO.
okay, so if we just strike the second whereas. And then change the town clerk at the bottom to Amanda Maharo, interim town clerk. Okay, is there any other thing that you have a problem with on this?
Yes,
Yes, but,
it shouldn't say sick leave, it should say paid time off.
well, we're gonna just strike that whole whereas.
Well, there's.
No, this is the
The second.
second, oh, the third whereas.
Okay,
So, and just so the board's aware,
Oh,
of this, if you haven't been around for a while, we used to have sick leave, and we used to pay out unused sick leave, and changed to a PTO process. That's when everything was kind of wiped clean, except those who had accumulated sick leave at that time were told when they leave the town, they would be paid as they were obligated. So that explains some of Corinne's stuff, because she's a long-term employee. And so any employee that's been on with us longer than 4 or 5 years, I think it is, has that benefit. So Cindy is probably part of that, some of the public works employees.
You only have 4 or 5 employees left that have it.
That still happen.
okay, so we have 3 different things to change. We're gonna strike the second whereas.
Yes.
The third whereas, we're going to change sick leave to PTO. And then the last should be Amanda Maharo, interim council.
Noted.
All right. All right, anything else from the board? All right, anything from the public? Yes, Mr. Baez?
One other thing I noticed on the resolution is the date says November 22nd. November.
So that needs to get changed as well. All right,
13.
all right. Thank you. All right, I think we have them all now. All right, so I'm gonna close the hearing. All right, I guess we can have a motion by the board at this point. We have all the changes unless there's something else somebody would like to say. All right, can I have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to pass resolution 13/20/2022 with the noted corrections and additions or additions.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion by the board? Public? All right, all in favor? Opposed? All right, that motion passes. All right, next. Unfinished business contract for SGM General Engineering. So we have what we have is just a small issue that needs to have board discussion on. With this SGM contract. And Nick, would you like to quickly go over that for us, please?
Yes, I'm happy to. And I'm not sure if it's a small issue, Mayor. I'm wondering.
Okay.
No, it's a small, yeah. as far as drafting goes, small issue. So what SGM requested was to remove their defense obligation from the indemnification clause. Has the board come across that before with a contractor?
No, not to the best of my knowledge.
Okay, so it is happening commonly these days, and one of the reasons is a lot of general liability insurances don't cover a defense obligation. And really, the only thing of consequence when it comes to the removal of the defense obligation is that the town would then just have to rely on SGM's defense obligation its indemnification obligation if the town were sued for an injury occurring out of SGM's negligence. So indemnification differs from defense in that indemnification covers the town's damages, whether that would be out of a settlement or out of actually a court award of damages. And what we're talking about in either case is SGM, they're carrying out their work under the contract. They do something negligent, and then someone sues the town, not SGM directly. They sue the town for something that SGM did, which happens because plaintiffs want to sue as many entities as they can to try and achieve damages for their injuries. So I've seen towns and cities decide either way. When a contractor wants to remove the defense obligation, towns sometimes are okay with it because they know they can rely on the indemnification provision and obligation. But what that means is the town would have to defend itself in the lawsuit rather than having SGM's insurance company appoint an attorney to defend the town. So what I think that would look like, and I haven't reviewed the town's insurance policies in depth, but I'm pretty sure CIRSA provides each of its members with contract coverage. So what it would look like if the town didn't have the defense obligation in this contract is CIRSA would appoint an attorney to defend the town, and then that attorney would seek reimbursement from SGM if damages were awarded against the town in that lawsuit. So ultimately, the financial piece of it might be the same whether or not the defense obligation is included in the contract. There's another issue here that I am recommending it kind of ties in with the defense obligation. They had removed their obligation to pay the town's court costs, expert witness fees, and attorney's fees, maybe thinking that that was part of their defense obligation. I don't know why they removed it, but I'm recommending that be added back in, because if they remove the defense obligation and they're not required to actually defend the town, then they should be responsible for those costs. Because it's their fault, right? If their negligence is proven to be that which caused the town to incur liability. So any questions on those points yet? There's one other thing I want to discuss as well.
Okay, questions from the board? Okay, seems like you're clear so far, Nick.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mayor. So the other thing is, I don't see this as being a large issue, but I don't know why they removed it. And I suggest that it be added back in, but they removed the references to intentional wrongful conduct. I don't know if that's because their insurance doesn't cover that, but I certainly think that they should be responsible for lawsuits that are wholly within their control. If they do an intentional act, it's supposed that they knew that they were doing that. And they should be responsible for that regardless of whether their insurance policy covers it. I would interpret the contract to mean, even if the intentional wrongful conduct references were removed, negligence requires a lower bar than intentional wrongful conduct, right? So I would say if we leave negligence in, it covers intentional wrongful conduct too, but we don't want them to be able to make the argument to the contrary. So my suggestion is that be left in as well.
Okay,
So what I'm seeking is just whether the town is okay with removing SGM's defense obligation, knowing that if added back in, their coverage of the town's court costs, expert witness fees, and attorney's fees will be covered for the town through their indemnification obligation. Is the town okay with that? And then I'm seeking also whether the town board would like to update the draft as otherwise recommended.
all right. What does the board think?
I move to instruct the attorney to make changes as he sees fit, as he's explained here, and re-enter the negotiations.
Do you have a second?
A second.
Other discussion from the board?
So essentially,
Clear on motions.
Okay,
I agree with what Nick is saying. It's going on, but the motion seemed a little loose.
all right,
So yeah, I'd like to amend the motion to
Sure.
take the attorney's advice and follow it.
you okay with that?
I'm fine with that. I'll second that.
All right. Anything else from the board then? All right, anything from the public? All right, so we have a motion and a second to take the attorney's advice and follow it. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Go, Nick. It's back in your court. Carry away. All right, next up is the contract for Respect, AKA JDS Hydro, for their water and sewer engineering. We have a red line, or in my case, blue line copy of that contract. Mine is on 194, beginning on 194.
And then I understand we don't have any disagreements with JDS. I know they're. Am I correct?
I believe that's the case, Leslie. I had made all of these red lines so that I'm seeing in the packet. So I believe they simply inserted comments to say that they were okay with it. So I think really we just need the board's input on whether the contract looks okay, and then we can finalize it and get it back here for your approval.
And I heard from Doug Schwenke, they're okay with Nick's changes. Okay.
Yes.
In the packet, there's on paragraph 12, this is on page 198, there's a runoff,
Oh, yeah.
and there's no verbiage here, so I have no idea what that says.
I can explain that, trustee. I think that that's an error in just the downloading, it looks like. But in the draft that we provided to them and that they'd okayed, this is basically a consequential damage limitation in the contract. So what they say is that the town could not recover consequential damages against them, which are not. So just to explain that briefly, consequential damages are not direct damages. So direct damages would be actual costs and injuries that the town directly incurred based on actions of JDS Hydro. Consequential damages by contrast are those that stem from the actions of JDS Hydro but aren't directly connected. So let's say they did something that led down the line without a nexus in the causal connection that eventually caused the town to lose profits. The town wouldn't be able to recover damages against them in that instance. I have never seen in my work with towns and cities a town or city go after a contractor for consequential damages. It's just not very common of municipalities or municipal resources. And there are lots of times, because municipalities are also regulatory authorities, that they have other recourse when something to that scale and that's largely impactful happens to them. So it's not typical of a municipality go after these types of indirect damages. And usually it's not a good use of resources to do so. Another thing is they're very hard to recover. You have to prove that they were reasonably foreseeable to both parties that there would be consequential damages like that loss of profits example, in order to recover them in court. So I'm comfortable that in adding this, leaving this clause, which they had included in their contract, because it's fairly typical of this consequential damages waiver clause to be added in the contracts, and the town can still recover damages if JDS Hydro is responsible directly for them.
Thank you.
All right. You said, yeah,
I just had two questions on the JDS scope of work. This is not a big question. It's just mostly for my edification. So on page 208 of the scope of work, let me see. It's the fourth bullet. Nope, sorry. Oh, second bullet. They just say prepare funding applications to finance water system improvements as necessary. Is a funding application the same as a grant? Okay, thank you. And then I had another question. It is 2 pages down, and I had my comments associated with the first version, so hang on. I think it's going to be on page 210. And it had to do with, we're talking about not replacing any sewer infrastructure. And I'm sorry, I didn't write down the bullet. My question was, and maybe somebody can see where I'm referring to, is
211.
on 211. I was wondering are they suggesting we not replace any clay sewer pipe until the wastewater treatment plant planning document is completed? That was my question. And does that make sense, Dave, where you're looking?
I was looking at the top of 211, it says wastewater.
Okay, then wastewater.
It's calling for a separate work order. Yeah.
Is that what that's meaning? They're not telling us to not do cleaned up clay pipe.
No.
It's just, it needs to be, okay, that's all I wanted, because I read it going, why would we not do that? Okay. Okay, thank you.
so can we get a motion then to approve this draft document?
I'll make a motion that we approve the master services agreement with JDS Hydro, with the understanding that the town is not obligated to use JDS Hydro in future projects.
Do I have a second?
A second.
Discussion.
I couldn't hear your last part.
Oh, the last part of
I
it.
didn't speak.
Okay, the last part of it, I think I read in this thing that we are not required to have to use them for future projects. I just want to make that clear to the public. So, and we're not necessarily approving them. Yes, you know, you're the guy.
Right. Exactly.
But here's the agreement. Shouldn't we?
Do you have a second?
I did.
All right. Further discussion from the board? Okay, from the public? All right, we have a.
Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Thomas.
Mr. Cotton-Bayes has his hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Markle. And Mayor, I just wanted to respond that the contract does include a clause that basically says that the town has no obligation to use JDS Hydro. Moving forward, you'll see that there are some contract templates included in the packet, and those also include that clause. It's a typical clause to add into a municipal contract. So I just wanted the board to be sure that that was included in there.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to approve the draft contract agreement with JDS Hydro, noting that we are not obligated to use only them. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that motion passes. All right, new business. First up is appointment of interim town clerk Amanda Mahara as interim town clerk. And we do have a resolution sitting in front of us. The number will be changed. Is that the correct number? Or does the number have been changed? Okay, so it's 18. All right, can I get a motion to approve resolution 18-2022?
Move to approve resolution 18-.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Next, resolution 20, yeah,
It should be 2022.
yeah, we do, yeah, that's what's in your preface. All right. Next, we have resolution 2022-16, setting of the mill levy. Can I get a motion to approve that?
Move that we approve 2022-16 set in the middle.
Second. Second. Discussion from the board. Public?
Yes,
Yes, Ms. Markle?
I just want to note that this is the same mill levy that was in place in 2020.
I'm sorry, what?
Just wanted to note that this is the same mill levy rate that was in place in 2020.
Yeah.
The same mill levy that has been the same one for over 11 years.
Right, our mill
We
levy-
have to go to vote to have it.
Yeah. Has to go to the voters to have it changed. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, that motion passes. Next, resolution 2022-17, adoption of the 2023 budget.
I move to approve the resolution 2022-17 adoption of the town budget.
Second? I'll second. Discussion from the board. All right, discussion from the public. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
That motion passes. Next, designation of a Christmas light judge.
This is an important.
This is always a fun. Usually we try and get somebody with kids. It seems like the only people with kids don't understand anymore. Is Amanda. Amanda, running the Christmas light judge with your kids?
Sure, I can do that.
Amanda and her family is the Christmas light judges.
So I'd like to make a motion that as a reward for being interim clerk. Yes, to be the Christmas light judge.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
One thing for discussion, I just want to mention that over the 31 years I've been here, the number of houses with Christmas lights keeps going down.
Yeah.
I walked down here this evening and there was a lot fewer than last year.
Yes. You should walk by my house as soon as Tina Walker gets her display.
Yeah, no, she gets.
It's not there yet. It's like she has to run in here. All right, so now we have 4 contract templates that have been provided to us by our town attorney. Would you like to explain the contract templates, Nick?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So these 4 contract templates have been prepared with the intention that they can be used as a starting point with contractors instead of using the contractor's own form. Kind of inspired by the JDS Hydro and SGM contracts, because there were some inconsistencies between the 2 forms that those entities used. They were okay. We were able to negotiate some changes. However, using the town's own templates will be more efficient. And the reason is because I'm familiar with these forms and what they could be, how they could be used is a staff member, a department head, or the town administrator could take the town board approved templates and send them to the contractor without my initial review. Then the contractor would come back with potential changes and I'd have to review only those changes rather than having to review the entire contract, which can sometimes take a lot of time depending on how it looks. So I think it could potentially lessen the town's legal fees. And moreover, I think more importantly is that starting with the town's form could increase the town's negotiating leverage. The idea is it's much easier to reject contractors' changes to your own form than it is to request changes to a prospective contractor's form. And I will say that, you know, the town's never in a position where it's trying to screw anyone out of contract, right? The idea is just to get a fair contract negotiated that's protective of the town and that is fair to the taxpayers. So these templates include a professional services agreement. These are intended for services performed by a licensed professional who is not an architect, an engineer, or a surveyor. I'll explain that in a second. But an example might be an attorney that you're contracting with. I think attorneys usually prefer shorter contracts, but another professional, perhaps an accountant, something like that, if the auditor that the town hires. Then there's a professional services contract for architects, engineers, and surveyors. And the reason that there's a differing contract is because there's a statute that limits the extent to which a town may require those kinds of professionals to indemnify the town. So we have a slightly different indemnification clause included in that contract. That's the only difference. Then there's an independent contractor agreement, and that's for services performed by somebody who is not a licensed professional. And then the only difference between that really and the professional services agreement is that the independent contractor isn't required to hold errors and omissions insurance as someone holding a professional license would. There's one other difference, and that's usually because professional services contracts contain stricter language about who owns documents, and the town wants to own documents prepared by consultants. It doesn't want to just have a license to use them because it wants to be able to reuse those documents later. And sometimes contractors will negotiate those provisions, but there's some differences in that language as well between the two that I've mentioned. Then I included a short form construction contract, and I call it the short form because you've probably seen some construction contracts that are a lot longer that include general and specific conditions and things like that. Short form construction contract is best to be used for construction projects that aren't that complex, that involve limited complexity. No more than one change order anticipated. There's no special or technical conditions due to hazardous materials or geotechnical engineering and things like that. In that contract, the short form includes terms that are specific to construction, like substantial and final completion, the contractor's warranty, licensing and bonding requirements, and other provisions that are specific to construction. I did not prepare a long form construction contract because I'm unaware of any really complex construction projects happening or planned for the town at this time. So I wanted to keep costs down, since that would be a much longer endeavor to prepare that for the town, but certainly can do so when it's anticipated that there will be a more complex construction project coming down the pike. So tonight, I'm seeking your approval of these templates to enable the town administrator, the town attorney, and department heads to require the use of the appropriate template as a starting place for negotiations with prospective contractors. And while the board would approve these templates, and that would indicate a delegation of authority to the people I just mentioned to negotiate contracts using these templates, the specific contracts would still come back to the board for their approval. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Nick from the board? Yes, Dave.
Well, I like the idea of having these templates instead of having to reinvent the wheel every time we go in. I appreciate your efforts in trying to keep the legal fees lower for our citizens. I had a question about the non-discrimination areas and equal employment opportunity. I didn't see the term gender identity being included in any of those, and I just wondered what the board thinks about including that in the non-discrimination area.
Does the board have an opinion?
I'm personally okay with it. Can you tell me what
Every one of the
Yeah, I
contracts.
just
has-
wondered where in the contract.
You know, it's near the end,
Yeah.
it says equal employment opportunity, equal opportunity employer in some of the contracts. In others, it says non-discrimination, so in other, it lists a variety of different factors that are taken. You know, race, color, religion, sex, age, and it does have, see, I think they aren't consistent though. I mean, one of them has, oh no, then later on it's. Like to see the,
Our religion, age, sex, disability.
yeah, there's another thing I was looking for too, and it's not just gender identity. So sexual orientation isn't always included, and I think that should be in there. Especially since we just saw the Defense of Marriage Act passed today.
And if I may just make one comment with regard to that, I have no issues at all adding in gender identity. I will just tell you that this mimics the protected classes that are listed in the for protection under the Equal Opportunity Commission, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the laws that employers are required to follow and to not discriminate, those classes that you cannot discriminate against legally. So it's not a you know, necessarily a choice just calling out certain you know, certain different classes that it comes from the law essentially. So that's why it reads it as it does. If there is anything that's inconsistent among the contract templates, I will certainly be sure to ensure some consistency among them. And I'm happy to add gender identity. It's certainly something that the town could require that a contractor not discriminate against someone for. So that could certainly be added.
Okay, then I'd like to make a motion that we include the words gender identity and the non-discrimination and equal employment parts of the contract. Did I say that loud enough?
I don't know.
Okay, let me try again.
Yep.
I'd like to include the words gender identity in the classes that are protected under equal employment and non-discrimination clauses in the contracts.
You want sexual orientation as well?
Sexual orientation is in there for most.
Okay, well, let's make sure because I.
And to ensure
Right.
that sexual orientation is also.
All right. Do I have a
Second.
second? You seconded, Thomas?
Yes.
Second.
Okay. Discussion, board?
Because there may be future protected classes added, shouldn't we be more generic and just say what the EOC wants?
It doesn't include gender identity then.
Yeah, and I will say that there is a catch-all provision at the end. If any other applicable status protected by state or local law. So if it should arise that there is a you know, in addition to the protected classes, then the contract will also protect that class.
That's what's needed.
Okay, so gender identity and
Sexual orientation and any additional classes within the state and federal law.
You modifying your motion
I am.
on the fly.
okay.
Just what we want to do.
Yeah. And any other protected classes. That's what Nick said. All right, do you agree with that, Thomas?
Yes.
All right. All in favor? Opposed?
Aye.
All right, that motion carried. Now, can we get a motion to accept the contract templates?
So moved.
We have a second?
Second,
All in favor?
I,
Opposed? All right. That motion passes. All right, let's move on to the SBA contract discussion. We're back at you, Nick. Boy, you got the floor a lot tonight.
Mayor, I'm sorry, are you waiting on me on this one?
Yeah, it is, because this is yours.
Sorry, let me get to him.
I'm fine finding it. Yeah, there's nothing there. It's
Nothing there.
260. Yeah, Nick's gonna fill us in on. Oh,
Okay, yes, I am. So I don't know the extent to which the board has been aware of this before. This is something I briefly worked with Corinne on before her departure. And SBA had reached out to Corinne about possibly expanding its leasing rights on the hill. I can't remember exactly where it is, but it's near the cemetery property. I understand there's a tower up there and they want to.
does everybody know that this is the cell phone tower up on the top of P Hill?
Oh, okay. No, I did not know that. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, and Mayor, I remember discussing this briefly with you. Is that within Paonia limits or
It
is
is
it?
not within Paonia town limits. We own the property up there, which is why we now have control over that tower, but it is not within Paonia town limits.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. And the only reason that that's of import is just because it would have to go through the town's zoning and building processes if it were within town limits. But because it is town-owned property, the town has a large amount of control over what SBA Communications can do on the property, subject, of course, to the existing lease. So in any case, what they did was they submitted a proposed lease amendment, and they've since asked about it. And we wanted to seek board direction about how to respond. I will say openly that the lease proposes a much taller tower. So the tower, I'm not sure exactly what the construction would look like, but it would become much taller under their proposed lease. And I think it was, yeah, it went from 50, that's the existing tower, to 75 feet. So an additional third. So that is a significant extension. And what I understand is that would allow them to co-locate more equipment of wireless providers on the tower. And thus, I mean, they have a financial incentive to do that. And they are also looking for, and it's not exactly clear yet, and we'll seek to gain this through negotiations with SBA, should the board direct Leslie and I to do so. But they're also seeking greater amount of area on the ground around the tower and for access, and then also for some ground equipment, it sounds like. So they have suggested that they make, for these expanded lease rights, they have suggested an amount of payment. And because we're talking about contract negotiations, I don't want to actually say the amount in a public meeting, but what they have suggested is a really low amount. And I've done some market research, and I believe that Leslie has experience doing this as well, to find that the town has been underpaid drastically, actually, well below market rate for the current lease that's existing. So what I'm proposing is that we negotiate a fair price should the board desire to allow the expanded lease rights, and try to get this closer to market, and get the town really what it deserves, the market rate for this lease, and particularly the expanded lease rights.
Yeah, Mr. Phillips.
Can we get a site plan and definite parameters for this expansion before we approve this?
Yeah, and
I'd like to see a construction plan.
Oh, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I was just seeking board authority at this point to even get into negotiations because there's a lot of information we don't know at this point. And yeah, and I'm hoping to gain that information through discussions with SBA Communications. I just wanted to seek board authority to do so first.
Leslie?
I just want to mention this a while back, Rick probably remembers, but I used to do these for Snowmass Village.
Yep.
And they charge full market rate for their tower. And we're getting pressure on one side from the SBA that if we don't do this right now, we're gonna lose all the leases. And I had one of the leases email me, and all they wanted to know is that we were making progress. The drama, you know how people get in negotiations. I'm not concerned about the drama. I think that we need to go back and make a fair market offer and see where it goes.
Yes.
Two considerations. One, with the increased height of the tower, I'm a little concerned about air traffic and how that affects airplanes, things like that. But secondly, our Paonian motion report talked about some kind of dark sky observation platform up there. If they're going to be doing a bunch of construction, it seems like this is also the time when they should start looking at what's going to happen to the ground up there and how do we prepare a possible future dark sky observation platform and also lighting situation.
Yeah. You might want to run that through the public because there are a lot. I just went through a cell phone tower drama and it's elsewhere. There are a number of people who believe that cell phone towers are dangerous for health reasons. So that might be something. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but from what I understand is the closer you get to the actual transmitters, there may be some health concerns. But you know, if you're planning to link that with the dark skies tower, you might want to have some public meetings about that before you proceed. Because people have very strong opinions about that, and I hate to have that not be bad.
Okay.
Have you been out there?
Years ago, I ran part of it.
There is a picnic table and stuff out there. There was, unless someone stole it. I mean, that was the intent.
Yeah.
It was when they put in the original cell tower, that was part of the deal.
Thomas?
Yeah, Mayor, I move that we authorize our town attorney to continue discussions with SBA regarding the cell phone tower construction.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Discussion from the board? Public? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that motion
Mayor.
passed. Pardon, Thomas?
Mayor, sorry, yeah, I didn't check it. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that any actual negotiations are held in executive session as appropriate.
Yes, of course.
Thanks. Okay.
All right. Next, we have direction for the interim administrator regarding working with the town attorney. Leslie, would you like to speak to this?
So I have had conflicting, I get sometimes individual opinions from the board about how much I should be using the attorney. In these land use decisions, particularly because some of them involve past recommendations, it's really important for me to run those by the attorney. I don't feel that I'm using the attorney too much, but I just wanted to see how you feel about it. If you want me to add, you know, I've had different comments and I want to make sure that I am working according to what the board would like.
Yeah, Dave.
I trust our interim administrator's judgment and being conservative in using the lawyer. But I think if there's a large legal bill that would be on the horizon of like, say, over $5,000 in a month, that would be something we might want to consider.
Well, considering that our attorney bill this month, I think is.
No, I'm talking about a single project.
Oh, one single thing.
One billable.
Yeah.
If we were going to do a big legal project, I think we would definitely bring it.
Right, yeah.
This is more that, you know, I look at some of these decisions I have the documents. I'll just tell you that I spent a lot of time on one decision, and then I found out that Nick had already spent a lot of time, and I could have just contacted Nick and he would have sent his document to me and I wouldn't have spent that time. So I feel like I'm absolutely thrilled to be working with Nick. I think he's an incredibly good attorney and you're lucky to have him. And it's important, especially in these beginning times when I'm getting a lot of different input, to be able to know that I'm seeing these things the way that they should be seen and the attorney would back them up.
Yes, Dave.
I feel that Leslie's very good at her job and should not put any obstacles in the way.
Yeah, and I think the same thing, especially now in the beginning, when she's just learning things, that Nick is an incredible resource. And to be able to reach out to him as needed is really valuable. And in the end, we'll save a lot.
That's what, I just want to make sure that's, everybody's fine with that. I mean, if we come across a big legal project, I think Nick's gonna say, this is a big legal project. You've got to cross the board. But these are kind of like, I'm looking at this is what you're seeing.
And I just have one comment. I agree with all that, but I have to ask that I wasn't quite sure why the water moratorium has come up the way it is. It has, that it's in the packet right now. I don't, well, and that was not by board direction that was to be done. So I'm kind of curious why it came up. And is it maybe because of your interaction with him on
Different interpretations of what I should be telling these.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Inquiries.
I just didn't know where it came from because we obviously had some previous work done on the moratorium, but it sounds like it's an offshoot of you trying to troubleshoot all these building permits, et
The
cetera.
other thing, and I'm gonna let Nick explain to you, is we have had discussions that I've dealt with moratoriums before. I've never seen a 2-year long moratorium before. And so we did have a discussion about that, and I'm not clear about why it has been applied for so long, but I think Nick is going to cover that in this discussion.
Yeah.
They're usually like 6 months. But every attorney that I've worked with, they want to put like a 6-month limitation, and then you can extend them if the emergency still exists. But this is a different animal, and I think we can talk that.
All right. So let's move on to adoption of ordinance 2022-07, the Charter Communications resolution. This has been published as needed. So can we get a motion to accept this?
So moved.
Can we have a second?
Second,
Discussion from the board?
can somebody tell me what page we're on?
Oh, I think we're on.
So
Thank you.
I went through this pretty closely, and what I was really happy to see is the clause in there where we have a public access channel.
Yes.
Provided within 180 days of the contract enactment. So I would like to encourage that we actually use this resource, and perhaps I don't know whether the high school is still doing that kind of thing, but we could possibly get our town meetings put on the public access channel. And we could also put anything that we want to put on that public access channel. Public information. It would be a really good way to get some stuff out there for anybody that still has cable TV.
Who has cable TV?
All 16, all 4.
Can I get a motion to?
That's one other thing is I've checked the franchise fee that's in that Charter Communications, and it's not the same as the Elevate fund, so it is fair as to what's going on.
Okay, so can I get a motion?
Make a motion that we adopt the charter.
Yeah, Charter Communication ordinance 07.
I make a motion, we adopt ordinance 2022-07 charter communication.
Second.
Second.
Discussion? Yes, Dave.
They're sending the copy to the wrong attorney.
What?
They're sending the copy to the wrong.
Oh, we'll get that straightened out.
With modification. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
All right, that motion passes. Now we get to the fun one, the water moratorium discussion. All right, Nick, back at you.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so I don't know if we're going to need the executive session, but I wanted to include that just in case the board had any legal questions specifically that might not be advantageous for me to answer in open session. So first, we just wanted to include this packet memorandum to seek the board's input on some of these issues. They're coming up a lot, as Leslie mentioned. There's, it's the moratorium is having an obvious effect on development within the town. Not saying that's necessarily a good or bad thing from an attorney's perspective, but just to briefly address the issue of the moratorium and how long it's been in place. As Leslie mentioned, it's typical of moratoria to be in place temporarily. Sometimes I actually think it's fairly typical for it to be 6 months, and then they do get extended beyond that. But typically the extensions are due to study and diligent pursuit of a remedy for whatever issue caused the moratorium to be put in place in the first place. So that is an issue that might be of concern to the board because there is a possibility that the town could be challenged for having the moratorium in place for too long without having shown a diligent pursuit toward lifting it. So that's why I wanted to get some just some background from the board on the moratorium's history and intent. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the board's understanding of the conditions required to lift the moratorium by its terms. And then after that, I wanted to get a sense of the board's understanding of the role of the selected water engineer in addressing those conditions. And then if we wanted to, we can talk about the issues in the memorandum that I sent to the board about this alternative interpretation that the board could adopt of the moratorium and particularly the definition of tap. So I'll turn it back to the board and let's just have a discussion on this.
Yes, okay. Well, I know Dave Knudsen and I have been on this the longest, and I think I'm the only member of the board who was actually on the board when this water moratorium was put into effect. And it did come out of the water crisis of 2019. And the intent basically was to put in brakes on the use of water and to stop the expansion of any use of water until we figured out what was going on and to, basically get a handle on our water issues. At that time, we did go ahead. We had the JDS Hydro grant was already put out when this water moratorium was put into effect. We had already gotten the grant, was already contracted with JDS Hydro to begin their study at the time this water moratorium was put in effect. So that they were already out there doing their work. So in one respect, it was never needed. And I think in part, it was a political act in response to it. It was a lot, some of it was, and this is my personal opinion, I think it was fear mongering. I think part of it was driven by, we don't want any more people in this town. This is another way to stop getting more people in this town. And again, that's my personal opinion from what was going on at the time, being on the board. And since that time, we did get the original version of the JDS Hydro report, and they gave us the original opinion said there was enough water coming down the hill with the metering that we had at the time, that we could serve all the taps in the town and all the standby taps with what they had. But they still couldn't guarantee water for more taps at that point in time. They needed to do more measuring and metering. We did not have the meters of the springs, we didn't have anyway. The 1 million gallon tank was still offline because we had never solved the problem with we had the tank relined and had to drain the tank to deal with water to the town, even though it was not treated water and it had to be boiled. But that was the water source that we were able to supply the citizens of the town with at least some water. Wow, we were refilling the 2 million gallon tank from the leaks that drained the tank in the first place. So that was the history and the intent of the moratorium. So JDS Hydro has been working since that time to be able to solve this problem, to give us the data to be able to answer the questions. And they have come back time and again with, this is what we need to answer the question. This is what we need to answer the question. And it's always been data driven. We need more data in this regard. We need more data in this regard. We need more data in this regard. And that's my take on it. Dave, you've been on this almost as long as I have.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on it, but I am, as a member of the board, I felt a lot of pressure on making sure that we had enough water for our citizens over time. I felt that the moratorium was not fear mongering. I thought it was very, it was thought out, and a lot of the citizens agreed that yes, we should make sure we have enough water before we start going willy-nilly adding more, selling more taps, those types of things. We've had a number of engineering studies. We've had a number of actually very strong public sessions about what the next steps are and what that needs to be. It's been a mixed bag with JDS Hydro because of some of the staff information that was falsified, essentially falsified to them. They were told that this plant was working when it wasn't. And so there were some real issues about the baseline data that we had going into this and whether we really had enough. And the big elephant in the room is these 400 taps that the mine owns, and we just don't know whether we have enough to service all of it. So all those things are weighing on my mind about, do we go willy-nilly and just let everyone go nuts and add more stuff? Or do we, in a very measured way, look at what's the capacity? And I think that's the piece right there that no one can answer right now. What's the capacity of our system? Climate change, global warming, undependability of what can happen with springs if the snowpack doesn't remain strong. The capacity is the big question.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was political. Running out of water in 2019 was a real shock to the town. And so this moratorium was a consequence of that. I've dealt with this issue since 2001. And the 300 tap obligation to Arch has always hung over this town like the sword of Damocles. And we've had a previous moratorium as we tried to address that issue. We improved the system, started fixing leaks, freed up a bunch of taps doing that. And when I left in 2012, the system was in pretty good shape. And the whole reason I'm back now is because the whole lower system is offline. It's been trashed. And this year, and Leslie's concerned, why is it taking so long to lift the moratorium? It wasn't until this year that really serious repairs started to occur on that lower system. We came close this year of running out of water. And what happens is we're no longer spilling excess water, which meant we're just running flat. What's going in is being used. And that's what tapped the system offline. So if we'd had a bad year, fortunately, we were saved by all rains that came in and allowed us to provide the water during this time of year from October through November. That's our minimum time. And we were lucky. But next year we may not be so lucky. It's absolutely essential before we lift the moratorium that the lower system be brought online. We're working aggressively to do that. I think it's quite feasible to have that lower system online early next year. And I'd like to see this moratorium lifted because it is really frozen everything. The housing problem totally depends upon water. Water is the foundation for housing. These are the two concerns that came out of strategic planning session, water and housing. Got to get the water thing. I have walked all the springs and I've seen what they're producing. And my feeling is, and I'm not an engineer, but I've worked with this problem a lot, is that we have an awful lot of water on the hill. Winston Waterworks, he said to me, he says, everywhere I look, you guys have water. You have the best water in the north. Our problem isn't water supply on the mountain. Our problem is getting it to the user. From the treatment plant down to the water meters, we lose half our water. We haven't quantified what's being lost from the springs to the treatment plant, but it's at least half our water. So we're running on 1/4 of our water that we actually have available on the mountain. And that is assuming that both treatment plants are online. So now we only have one treatment plant online and half of it we're just dumping down the ditch. So the lower system's got to come online before we can lift the moratorium. Because the moratorium lifting it requires that we provide two things. First, that we can guarantee we have enough water. And second, that we can deliver that water to the customer. I think we could probably solve that first one, guaranteeing that we have enough water quite easily. Delivering it to the customer, we can't do that right now.
Well, I would disagree with you on one point, Dave, is that,
Mayor,
every year, just 1 minute, Thomas, and I'll call.
before you get into it, can I have my time to speak?
Just 1 minute, Thomas. I would disagree with you on one point. Yes, every year we get to the point where it equalizes. What's coming in is what's flowing out. Because I've watched this year after year after year, if I've been on the council, because I've watched the water tables come and go. And last year was actually not a bad year. The year before was very scary. Last year was not so bad. Yes, Thomas?
Okay, thanks. So to answer your question, Nick, and I guess to try and get you guys up to speed, Leslie and Nick, the water emergency was in 2019, early 2019, January. I guess it ran into February actually as well. And then at the end of 2019, there was a citizen initiative to stop, for the moratorium. And in 2020, the advisory water committee was formed essentially to address that issue. I was on the committee at that time. The primary concerns are the variability and limited nature of the water rights and treatment resources that we have. So in order to try and quantify those, we hired JDS Hydro, and I think Mayor, your timing, recollection of timing may be incorrect. I'm pretty sure JDS was contracted after. Yeah, okay, well.
Mine is correct, yours is incorrect, Thomas.
Yeah, that I actually, Thomas, went through the documents and I, at the first, thought I was reading it wrong, that the town had already hired JDS Hydro and then the crisis happened. It was a really interesting juxtaposition of dates, but yeah.
Regardless of having dates, with two halves of the system, the upper plant, the lower plant, and there are between 300 and 400 taps which are sold but currently unused. The question that needs to be answered is, how many taps can we actually service? And the delay due to various conditions, I guess, is primarily due to lack of data. Actually the sewer treatment data came through immediately. The upper treatment plant data was somewhat slow, but began coming in into the second year, I think, of the moratorium. And the lower plant data was fabricated. There's a letter from JDS that I hope you've both seen that indicates really the state of where we were, and that was in I think January of this year. So the difficulty is in getting good information. The delay is in getting good information to our engineers. If you look in the past, we have had several other engineering studies that indicate that we do not have sufficient water for our current taps in a dry year, or I'm sorry, in a drought, like a subsequent several series of dry years. So the concern is, and this is something that came up with previous boards, basically the mentality of people in general is that we can do what we want. If we have a tap with water, we can use it however we see fit. However, if we have too many taps on the same system and the system is stressed to the point where it can't service all of them, then we can't use it as we see fit. And that's the situation that I think the moratorium is trying to avoid. What we're trying to do is make sure that people can have kids and relatives and friends and, you know, take showers and grow plants and live life as they have for the past 130 years in Paonia. However, the reality is that with added tap use, with added water use, that can't happen. So as soon as we answer that question, we can say the total number of taps that can be sold.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes, Rick.
This decision has to be a data-driven decision. We can't run this decision on assumptions and anecdotal evidence. We need data from our springs to tell us how much water is up there first. Then we need to know how much water we put into the system and how much gets to the water treatment plant. Then we need to know how much water we're spilling in town. And all of those things are a portion of this moratorium. And the voters were quite clear about it. They absolutely wanted a moratorium. And our failing right now is we have no data. And I don't know that if it's JDS's purview that we get equipment, or they specify equipment for the springs. And also we collect data over a number of years for flow in, flow out, and how much water we actually sold to consumers. All of those things are part of this decision. And I'm really reluctant to raise the moratorium without some data.
Yes, Leslie.
Do you want to ask your question first? Because I'm going to tell you what I've already done.
I was just wondering I just wanted to add in, and Dave, Weber, and Thomas can correct me. So there was an issue that we lost a year, I feel like, because the data was not provided to JDS. And the data I thought was user data. How much was being used by the people paying for water, or was it it was the springs?
Yeah.
So we lost a year of data not being provided that needed to be. We could be done by now,
Yes.
potentially, if that hadn't had the attention it needed. So now, go ahead.
So one of the things that I'm doing for Nick is I'm going through all the documents and trying to make a timeline about what was done and what was recommended and what was followed through on and what wasn't followed through on. And I've got to the point where I'm about 70% clear about the issue and where the breakdown is. And I also called James Starnes on Friday and had a very more illuminating than reading all the documents was talking to James Starnes. My concern is that when you have a moratorium, you have to aggressively pursue getting the moratorium off I don't see that in the records. What they made a number of recommendations, and I'm in the process. Jeremiah has made some comments about the way that I saw it. We're going to talk that out, but these are details. The town did do a rate study, which was recommended. They increased their expert staff, which was recommended. So those two things have been met. They wanted meters on the springs. We never did it. I have told the Public Works crew to immediately get those estimates for those meters. We can write a grant to get those done and we'll get them in. But what I understand now, I first thought that all they needed was data. But the problem is going to be that James, they're very frustrated. I mean, they basically said to me, we're really glad you're there because they've worked with me before and they know I get projects done. I said, well, let's wait a minute because I don't know what the situation is there, but there's a number, as I think Dave Weber, you described. The problem is not just data, it's then getting the water to people. And there are some really expensive fixes for that. And we haven't really progressed on any of them. And I think my concern is that you've had a moratorium in effect for almost 2 years. And if someone comes along and says, what are you doing? Which is I'm in that situation right now with this one developer. I haven't got much to show them. And what I think we need to talk about, this conversation needs to keep going, you know, once I think we have a discussion tomorrow and kind of figure out that the staff is in agreement and that James Starnes is working with us to have a program to lift this thing. We've got to go for it. So it's really complicated. I think James said, you have one of the most complicated water systems in the state. And now I agree. I didn't know what people meant before, but they're very frustrated because they feel like they've kept asking for things and they don't get done. And here's my big concern. He told me that they need 1 to 2 years worth of data. And we don't even have meters in yet. To get these things done, minimum to me is 3 years. And that's having somebody drive that project as fast as they can. Yeah.
Meters on the springs, how many times, Rick, did we put that in the budget and it got canned?
Every time, every budget, I think, since I've been on the council.
We've been chasing that since the early part of the millennium. And yes, we do need meters on the springs because that's the only way we can quantify our losses between the springs. And
I'm so glad to hear you because I thought I was going to be bringing something that's up that you didn't want to hear. Because I am really concerned about when I look at the records and what's been done and not done. And I heard the story that the meters were taken out of the budget, and I'm like, no,
Never that I know of.
Yeah, and I don't believe we ever had them in the budget. And then I recall, since I've been on the board, they may have been proposed and
They
then.
were proposed and we were supposed to get data for how much money it would cost. And that's where it dropped.
So that's my concern is I'm getting pressure. When is the moratorium going to be lifted? I've been telling people I heard 2 years before I knew what this actual situation is. I feel like I have a better handle on what you need to do. I am concerned 2 years is not enough. If you have to do all those things that I saw in the recommendations to get the funding from CDPHE and install all of that, and this is with somebody like me writing roughshod on everybody to get stuff done on time, it's 3 years. So I think what we've talked about is how so there's that issue. But the other issue that Nick and I have talked about is that the way the code is written now, things could be clearer. And that's something that immediately that we might be able to talk about a solution to. Nick, do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, Thomas has his hand up. Let's let Thomas quickly say what he needs to say.
Thanks. Yeah, so I was actually a kind of a question, I guess to Leslie, what obligation do we have to developers?
You don't have an obligation. There's, and maybe Nick, you can explain moratorium law in Colorado and kind of how it's the concept of a moratorium and how it has to be managed.
Yeah, I think that is really the crux of the issue, the legal issue anyway. There's no specific obligation to developers when the moratorium is in place, so long as it's in place legally. And moratoria have been found to be legal when they're temporary, when a governing body needs time to study and rectify an issue that's been discovered. Obviously, this is an important issue, and I think the concern was that the town's moratorium could potentially be challenged based on the possibility that the town wasn't diligently pursuing lifting it. That is a concern. However, having heard some of the board's comments and the additional detail tonight, it does seem like the board has been at points at least pursuing the fixes and receiving the data needed to lift the moratorium potentially and get those by its own terms. I think the board has legitimate concerns that those conditions that are actually written into the moratorium should be fulfilled before it lifts the moratorium. So that's great to hear from my perspective, because I had made the comment to the board that there's no necessary need to meet the conditions in the citizen initiated ordinance. The board could technically lift that if it wanted to by passage of a subsequent ordinance. But now what I'm hearing is from a policy and a practical perspective, there are reasons to fulfill those conditions. So I think so long as there is diligent pursuit of rectifying the issues that led to the moratorium in the first place, then in the board's legitimate concerns as to why it shouldn't be lifted, the moratorium itself can be justified legally. So the concern really was, is there enough support for it still being in place? So, reasonable minds in litigation might be able to disagree on that, but I'm more comfortable in the town's position after hearing this discussion tonight.
Me too.
Yes, Chris.
Can I speak? Citizen. So. Hearing my first stand, so Chris Kendall,
I wasn't behind the moratorium to start with. I was behind getting all the water companies together. Because we have so many water companies. And the town, the deal was years ago, and I don't know if it's in writing or what, but everything I've heard is in early 1900s, the farmers came and they came to the town of Paonia and said, if you will service our areas with water, we will feed you the water. And, there were some that didn't. But for the last, 2019, we were 3 weeks. We had no running water. I had no running water for stock or anything. And we have been fighting since then, even before then, on the water, because we had some shady stuff going on. It's all I could, and we're still, even now, we've still got stuff going on. It's just kind of like saying that it's okay to have apartments in the Masonic Lodge, but they don't have to buy more taps. Well, the way I see it, if you had 2 apartments or 3 apartments, that was one building, and you're going to add 3 apartments in there, you should have 3 taps. because that's adding more stress on our lines. It's adding more stress to our water. And, you know, it wasn't for scare tactics that the moratorium went in, and it wasn't but it was legit. Because there wasn't, and there is a time that we do run level. And so we add 400 more taps. What happens to our running level? Or we've already been running level at this point. And I agree, it's going to take 2 to 3 years, if not longer, of good documentation, which I'm a little more confident now that we have Corey. And then because Corey's getting stuff done. And the board understands we need these meters and stuff. And so, yeah, I can go into it. Yeah, you know, I've been here since the beginning, so, you know. That's what I got to say, I hope. And I'm glad we're keeping the moratorium going.
Thank you, Chris.
So I think Chris alluded to that second issue, that I think we need to clean the code language up.
Yeah, and one of the ways to do that is we just say that a tap is a 3/4 inch equivalent, and that every residence needs a tap. Period. Done.
So what do you think the process is for that?
We have to do an order. We have to do the order.
Yeah.
Yes, well, I thought we already had that in place, excuse me. I thought that was already in place that you could not.
Yeah.
I remember we talked
In the old land use regulations, that was true. But they threw them out to 2017.
Because I know we've had the talk in the last year or two about it, that you could not extend a water line
Correct.
and it has to be a tap.
Yes.
One of the problems that existed is the word tap has two meanings in the ordinance. One is a physical connection to a water line. The other one is supplying service to a particular unit, whether it's an apartment or whether it's a house, whatever.
Yes.
Those keep getting confused. So if you're going to go in that code, please clean up the language with the definition of a tap.
And I think the delivery line too needs to be cleaned up. Because that's a big confusion to what that service line.
What we might want to do, Nick, and please weigh in, is set a workshop to talk about the code language. Because we're not going to fix it tonight, but I think both Nick and I mean, my training is I have to go to the code. I can't go based on somebody else's opinion about the code. I have to read the code as it is. And you know, I think Nick has identified some inconsistencies and some clarity issues. I think that's probably something in the short term we can address while we're working on this kind of path forward to get the moratorium lifted and make sure that the town has enough water. But I guess my overall message is that the town needs to be aggressive.
I didn't hear that.
Town needs to be aggressive. Yeah, I think, Jeff Conklin and Nick have said basically the same thing in their opinions.
We need to clean up a lot of the code. We
Oh my
basically
God.
have mismatched at this
I
point.
noticed that.
Yes, we
You
have.
have one of the most weird zoning codes and unclear as a day.
2017.
And it focuses all its energy on one item that I don't think is very important and hardly anything on stuff that I think is super.
Well, we had a very libertarian council at one point.
Oh.
And that's from
Hey, that's a nice way to pay it there.
I'm very proud of that.
It's actually essential that we start metering the springs. We had $300,000 that we had dedicated to. Also use that money for metering the springs. It's there. It's shrunk to like 330 or something because I know it's still a chunk. And metering is cheap.
Yes.
And we're not talking about a big ticket item.
It's been done.
It was, we put it in the budget, the mayor spiked. We put it in the budget, they decided to reallocate it to something else. There was a philosophy in previous councils that data wasn't important, just get the water there.
Yep.
In other words, but in engineering, if you don't measure it, you can't control it. That's a fundamental aspect of engineering. And so we pushed for it, but we just couldn't get the council to buy it.
Well, and now we have the money. That's the thing. The one big advantage we have right now is there are huge pots of money out there. So, hey, let's start with the 300 and whatever $1,000 we have left from ARPA. That is so easy for us to just slam dunk, use it, slam dunk, use it, slam dunk, use it. As far as matching funds go, if we get right up that big SRF loan, we can use that as matching funds for all kinds of grants.
There's
So
no
let's
problem
do
with
it.
funding. But this is what I'm advocating, and I always advocate to everybody. What I notice small towns do is they zero in on a problem and they want to fund it and fix it. You gotta go up here. And you gotta look at the myriad of problems and decide what the most important ones are to fix first and how they relate to each other. Because this, if there's one thing I can convey to you, all these fixes are related, which you know. It has not only to do with repairing the springs and metering the springs, it has to do with then how the water is conveyed that establishes how much water you can deliver.
But one of the things about getting a grant, if we can show that we're losing 70% of our water, that's a really big deal for getting a grant from the feds or wherever. You know, and that the metering thing, that's the tool we can use to get that.
I don't think you're gonna have to beg the state.
Oh,
They already
no.
know you're
Oh,
in trouble.
no. It's a thing that
That's why you can kind of, you know, say, okay, what do we need?
exactly.
$55 million. It's everything.
I actually think it's closer to 8. That's not a whole lot of money. in the world-wise.
Well,
We can do that.
I did pipeline work, and one of the things about that area up there, we're gonna have a lot of trouble with excavation, and it's steep.
Oh, yeah.
All of those things will come in, and it
That's
gets
where
really expensive.
we have work to do.
Mhm.
We have basic cost estimates that were prepared, I think, in May. So prices have changed since May. So what we're doing now is we're taking the big items and kind of ordering them. We're going to talk to James Starnes again, who's been extremely helpful. And then we'll start unpacking those and getting real cost estimates, and then we can go and put a funding package. I don't think you need to worry about the funding.
Yes, funding is not the issue.
If you've got a big problem, the state will be there for it. Because I've done other projects where people have big problems, and the funding is not the issue. It's getting the plan together.
Right.
And being able to present it and
Yep.
get the data and all that stuff that you have to do. So I feel really happy because I was so worried about having this conversation.
Our rule.
I hear what you're saying. No, these are stupid.
Oh, gosh, thank you. Okay, so I think we're finished with this, so we don't need an executive session. We don't have any, I guess we don't have any community report.
Thomas had his question about the 250 hours from the personnel.
Oh,
committee.
right, yes, let's deal with that, since we have 18 minutes. So,
All right, so I guess just the background on this. It was a meeting on when was it? October 22nd, I guess, the last meeting. I noticed that there was a payout for Corinne Ferguson's of almost $10,000. And I sent an email to Leslie, and the summary was that she had employee annual payout of I won't go through all the numbers, but it comes down to essentially the big ticket item is 240 hours of what do we call this, prior sick leave that totaled $8,880 that was accrued over her tenure up until June 1 of 2018. And if you divide $8,880 by 240, you came up with the same rate of pay as she was given in 2022. So my understanding, based on what was sent to me, is that the prior sick leave balance was calculated up until June 1 of 2018 and should have been calculated at the rate of pay at that time, I guess, or previously. I'm not sure if it's prorated or not. And it appears to have been calculated based on the 2022 rate. I haven't done the math. I don't know what the difference is. I just want to make sure that somebody else is aware of this and might look into it.
Thomas, could I ask you, do you have the personnel rules in front of you?
I don't.
Because I had read through there and there is a provision in the personnel rules that reference their 2018 pay, rate of pay associated with the 240 hours. I'm looking over Dave's shoulder here and I don't see it, but I think, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I'm looking at the what was sent to me from Leslie, and this was on Tuesday, the 29th, October 29th, or I'm sorry, November 29th. I assume this is copy and paste from the employee manual. It says effective June 1, 2018, town transitioned from a traditional policy of vacation, personal sick days, and sick leave to a combined general policy of personal time off as outlined in section 401. Consequently, the town does not currently provide a separate sick leave benefit. However, in order not to adversely affect employees hired prior to June 1, 2018, the accrued sick leave balance, any unused sick leave was converted to, quote, prior sick leave. Prior sick leave may be used by those employees for short-term disability, maternity leave, or family leave from the first day such disability or leave is designated. Upon retirement, resignation, or reduction in force, employees with a prior sick leave balance will be paid up to 240 hours of prior sick leave at their rate of pay on June 21, 2018. Any prior sick leave discharged from employment with the town will cause to be forfeited, not paid by the town. So I don't know what the difference is. I asked for Corinne's rate. I guess I didn't ask for it, but I just wanted to make sure that the rate was correct for 2018. And my response was that the finance committee already signed off on it. So I wanted to bring this to everybody's attention, make sure that I don't know what recourse might be appropriate or possible or anything else. Also, there was a note that Cindy noted that Corinne was not the administrator in 2018. There was no actual rate listed there. And also she notes that we shorted Corinne about 50 hours. I'm not sure what that reference is specifically. And Cindy appears to think that this offsets the discussion and she'll be reviewing it. So I don't know if anybody wants to do anything. I just want to make sure everybody had the chance to know about it. Thanks.
So if I can, I asked when we were going over the payroll at that meeting, remember? And I said, well, wait a minute, I thought she already got her PTO the previous pay cycle. And then Cindy said that she was one of very few employees who was here with the town of Paonia long enough to get a payout of that portion of the 240 hours she had not used. Does that sound right?
240.
Yes.
The maximum payout.
And if she hadn't used it, so that was where and only now 4 people are left on the payroll that got that early deal. So that was the explanation given to Dave and myself by Cindy, that she was one of the few people grandfathered on that. Now, what we didn't talk about, and I had not looked at the personnel rules, was the rate of pay in 2018. That's the piece that probably did not happen. Wouldn't you say, Cindy, that you paid her? You paid her at her current rate of pay.
That's what we did with
Okay.
the previous administrators. When they left, they were all of their time was paid out at their rate at that time. It's only for the administrator. It's not for any of the other employees. When Travis's was paid out, it was paid out at, it was prorated to the rate of pay from 18. When it was done was not intended to for the administrator.
So it's not anywhere in the personnel rules, though.
I don't know about that, but that's what I have been told over the years. And that's what we did for Jane, and that's, if Ken would have had any, we would have done it for Ken. Ken didn't have any.
Yeah.
Didn't have any time period.
Well, this is just a new piece of information we weren't provided. when Dave and I were in there doing the, because it made sense to me. I said, okay, she was one of the grandfather people, but I didn't know rate of pay, and now it's good to know that administrators have a special dispensation. Okay.
Only if it's in their contract. Only if it's in their contract, because she was under the person later was administrator, and that's why I kind of have a problem. I think I agree with Nikki Markle. The payout should have been according to the personnel rules. Unless her contract specified differently.
And
I
we'll
don't think
go
it.
back and review her contract. I will review the employee policy and I will show you where we should be and where we are.
That'd be great. Thank you.
All right, anything else?
Just to review the math here, just did some, I don't know what the rate of pay for Corinne was in 2018, but what I saw was payroll for October 29th through November 11th, 53 hours and a half at $1,979.53 comes out to $37 an hour. And then she was also paid out at $37 an hour for the 240 hours that she had accrued in 2018.
That's correct.
At the same pay.
Water committee, can I talk about this really quick? Since we're on the water, this is relevant. Okay, Sariani resigned from the advisory water committee as its duties have been subsumed by the standing water committee. Phil has a lot of expertise in water treatment, was an essential in helping Jeremiah and Jordan on the repairs to the system. I just would like to thank Phil for what he's done. He's kind of handed the torch to me, and I'll see if I can run with it. The advisory water committee enabling ordinance needs to be rescinded because it's been replaced by the standing water committee. And also, we've kind of expanded the water committee beyond the sort of restrictive design of the advisory water committee. I'd like to put that on the January budget agenda, please. These are some ideas that came out. We've had a lot more people coming into our meetings and creating ideas, and I encourage the public to come forward to our meetings. The next one will be on December 21st at 6 p.m. and there will be refreshments to get you to come. Now, these are some ideas that came out of the last meeting on November 30th. Now is the time to think big when going for grants. Just don't think about relining the 2 million gallon tank and replacing the 8-inch water line. Start thinking about a new 2 million gallon tank at the clock site. Think about other bigger issues that could be fixed. Because if we're going to go for money, Leslie said the same thing to me, let's go big. Another idea that came out, with the water system needing major repairs and the town administration in flux, now is the right time to think simply beyond repairing failed systems. For example, what can we do on the mountain to enhance spring production or storage in the Talus fields? Really, we have an underground reservoir in the Talus fields in the mountain. That's where our water is stored. And we have no good storage sites above ground. This has been gone over and over and over, back all the way in the 1990s. And I want to point out 3 things that the town could have been more aggressive about, but we're too timid about historically. The first one was Rick Stelter's idea about putting a bulrush finishing pond on the sewer plant. It was a great idea. It would have kept both phosphorus and nitrogen out of the river, but the engineers, they hadn't known anything about it. They were too timid. The council didn't want to go there, but as Rick had pointed out, Eureka, California had been using it for years and it was a very successful system. We should have gone more aggressively for that. Another one, which was an idea that we started to pursue but got timid on, was using ozone rather than chlorine to treat the water. The old timers kept saying that the water was way better before the chlorine went in. We'd have to push the state on that because the state wants residual chlorine in the water to determine quality. But when I was at Big B's doing computer work for them, helping fix their system, he runs his apple juice right through a quartz pipe, shines UV light through it, creates ozone, produces a pure thing, and leaves no residual flavor at all. That would have been something we should have pursued and perhaps should think while we prepare this system. And the final one, which we had talked about historically but never got off the ground, was micro hydropower. It used to be that we had Yardleys in the treatment plant. They required no excess energy. They simply were gravity fed or pressure fed from the water. using a membrane filter and a sand base underneath it. Now we have a treatment system that requires a lot of power, 3-phase power up there. We could actually have the plants power themselves. We have like a 1,500 foot drop into springs. That's a lot of energy.
There's grants for that.
We need to actually tap that energy. So all these ideas could be added into whatever sort of grant thing we're doing. And they're innovative, they'll attract attention. Another idea that came out of this meeting is that the town government's doing a terrible job of communicating to citizens about the two most important things that they identified in the strategic planning session, water and housing. When you go to the town website, either water or housing is prominent on the front of the town website. And that should be something that's there. There should be a front page direct link to water and another to housing. The housing one, there should be the grant that you obtained, planning grant, that should be acknowledged on the town website. On the water side, the water information should have Jeremiah's water repair status report, his video presentation on the water system, water quality reports, water grants being pursued, future plans, and information on the water moratorium and what we're doing about it, which was tonight's subject. And finally, the town mails out an annual water quality report to the citizens. It reads like a lab report that's incomprehensible to many and definitely boring. We should use the mailing to provide more relevant water information like system status and future plans. Did I make it?
Yeah, this is fair.
So I just want to say that the water committee is being active and we'll have some more ideas for you next.
The law enforcement meeting at 3 o'clock on the 20th. There will be a Parks Committee meeting at 4 o'clock on both here in town hall. We will not have statements because people come anyway.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.
Night, everyone.
Dave,
Yeah.
thank you, Dave.